don't need that. I forgot to tell him about you.
I'll wait outside with the other beasts.
You said no one else knew.
Sorry. She's my maid. Sworn to silence. Lie down, please. Please. It's good you're remembering things. This might sting. Do you remember anything else?
One of the tricks in sort of conceiving this entire sequence would be in making him delirious and in making him really wounded initially, it allows her to be kind to him without giving him a chance to object. You know, originally in the story, this is a young man who absolutely hates the Irish and believes them capable only of barbarism. And so here he's confronted with this young woman who's essentially saved his life and is being incredibly kind to him. And it's really the start of Tristan's entire worldview beginning to change. He's starting to go from someone who believes that there's nothing more than his dream of uniting England and defeating the Irish, and now suddenly life has thrown a wrinkle at him in the form of this beautiful young woman who has, in her own way, you know, she's getting a chance to act out a fantasy of hers, which is really, she's getting to choose to be intimate with someone. She's getting to choose to like someone or to let them get to know her, as opposed to the forced marriage which she's awaiting.
You've been away.
Ah, you noticed. Yes, I have a bit.
Where?
Grania and I was spying the convent.
I mean, I think ultimately, if Isolde's not promised to Morholt and angry about it, then her willingness to take in a wounded English young man becomes a little harder to believe.
Any word of my betrothed?
And it was very important for all of us to make it feel as natural as possible that these two get together, as opposed to merely that it's just love at first sight. Really, for both of them, it's their first glimpse of love. And it just so happens to be that it's coming in the form that's impossible to sustain. Sometimes there are things that you put in as a writer that because they're merely description, people will overlook them. You'll get notes from studios to say that you need more of this or more of that, when the reality is as soon as you see it on the big screen, you know, it has tremendous impact. And I think Isolde seeing Tristan bathe, seeing sort of that healthy naked man, you know, is really the beginning of her turn.
If you insist. My name is Brania. I'm a lady in waiting at the court. My parents are dead. My mother, she's the source of the kindness you find so puzzling.
Some things just always seem to be sexy in movies, and I think a woman cleaning a wounded man, as long as he's somewhat healthy and looking into her eyes, always seems to sort of ring with sexual tension, especially if he's young and handsome and has ripped abs. This too is one of the changes that happened from first draft to sort of finished film. In the first draft, there was a lot more talking, frankly, between the two of them, and a lot sort of more intellectualizing, and they were awfully self-aware, and that was one of the things Ridley pointed out to me, that young people who are in love for the first time and haven't been through heartbreak aren't really good at talking about their feelings. Because I knew I wanted to get rid of the love potion later in the story, it became very important that Tristan not know her name. Luckily that it made sense to me, story-wise, that she wouldn't tell him her name, because she is an incredibly important person in the Irish court, and the last thing she wants is him to know, whether it be for her own protection or whether it be because it'll terrify him and he'll run away. As long as she's a lady in waiting at the court, the fantasy can continue. And in fact, it allows her to sort of play out the fantasy. She can pretend she's someone else. A nice little motif that I actually only used at the end of the screenplay and Kevin Reynolds put in the movie here was that he makes something for Isolde here, which I think is a really nice touch. I mean, Kevin, when he came on board, he was really determined to make this movie as romantic as possible. You know, he would talk about movies like Dr. Zhivago. He would talk about sort of the sweeping doomed lovers that he wanted to make.
I happen to believe what this is. Don't you think there's more to life?
I can't quite remember when I had the notion of putting in Isolde reading to him. It wasn't in the original draft of the screenplay. But by the second or third draft, I just started having these images in my mind of her reading to him almost like she's reading him stories when he was sick. And then what that turned into was her reading him sort of passages that represent what she really thinks life is about. In the original screenplay, she reads from the Song of Solomon. And then she would actually, at the end of the film, reads that same passage to him. I love the moment here where Branya mentions Isolde's promised. Every now and then you see something that you write and you watch an actor sort of play the moment and it's exactly as you think. And when Sophia sort of glances up at Branya, I just think that's the kind of thing you just can't write on the page. You just have to hope they act it.
You're promised.
Yes.
What's he like?
And another reality of making a movie is you can't control the weather. In my mind, the sequence here where they eventually kiss when they're talking about wanting something they can't have was all done in a sort of tumultuous rainstorm.
I didn't know what I was talking about.
One of the changes in general to the movie from the screenplay was some of the anger was taken out of their relationship, and including in even here in the original screenplay, they get a little mean to each other when they realize it's not going to work out. And he alludes to the idea that she's sort of tougher and colder than she lets on. And it's out of that anger that the kiss happens. I think almost every good kiss in movie history is at the end of some character moving towards the other character, most of the time in a moment of anger or emotion. One of the major story changes to the film was this moment right here. In the original screenplay, they do not make love when he's in Ireland. They do not get the chance. They are about to get the chance, and it's taken away. And probably the closest thing we had to an argument in the development of the screenplay, and we really never did have any arguments, was whether or not they should make love here, which would hurt more later. And I really did believe ultimately either version would work. in my original conception of it, they didn't, simply because I thought it would be more painful if, frankly, the first man she made love with was Lord Mark. But Ridley pointed out that a young man and a young woman in a deserted hut or cave who love each other would not hesitate to make love. And that moment right there between Isolde and Branya is one of the nice consequences of that. In the most popular sort of original version of the story, Tristan and Isolde make love on the boat on the way back, shortly after having swallowed love potions that they thought were death potions. I think a couple times in every movie, the audience gives you one or two what I call cheats. I think this is probably one of them. I mean, how they know Tristan is alive and somewhere on the coast and it's Tristan. I mean, in the screenplay, I went to great lengths to sort of explain how they knew. The guys who come back from Ireland tell them that Tristan was in that boat. But the truth is, it's kind of a stretch. But luckily, I don't think when you're watching the movie, because you know Tristan's there and you know the Irish hate Tristan, I think as soon as you see them find a boat and a sword, you go with it, hopefully. Most of the time when I see films and people are in the ocean, it's clear that they're in some sort of tank. And one of the things I love about the way Kevin Reynolds filmed this was they're clearly cold in the ocean and the waves are rocking them, and that's no special effect, and the waves hit when the waves want to hit. And I think it adds to the sort of turmoil that's going on between the two of them here a lot.
I want to know that you're alive somewhere, thinking of me from time to time.
I can only wonder how cold they were, though.
To this life, and I can't know that if they kill you. Please.
This is really the first of several times when essentially they have to say goodbye to one another. And it's always more or less for the same reason, which is that it's just not meant to be politically, and there's too much against them. She can't get in that boat, because if she gets in that boat, they will be hunted to the ends of the earth by the Irish. It's also interesting that in this case, it's Isolde who makes the decision, and then in the next case, it's Tristan who makes the decision. The idea was that they both make this decision at least once in the movie, and then they completely give in to their affair.
Corpse will find, for he has slain your betrothed.
Sometimes when you're putting a story together in your mind, events come together and you get what I consider a happy accident. And when I decided that Tristan would kill Morholt and Isolde had just been promised to Morholt, you get the sort of happy accident that Tristan has actually liberated her from a loveless marriage.
Stunned, as am I by her grief.
Should have sold the British straight away. Crushed them with maximum force.
Maximum force. The one butchered by Mark's tribes, would that be the force you speak of?
One of the things that Ridley, Kevin Reynolds, and I would talk about at length was how to keep the political story in this movie alive without making it too complicated. And sort of the recurring theme is that the Irish king will do anything he can to keep the English divided. He tries force and it fails, so then he tries cunning. That's the fastest sailboat I've ever seen in my life. The design of this entire next section of the movie was very deliberate, and it gets shortened here in the final presentation, but it was very important that the notion of the tournament be introduced before they know Tristan is alive. The idea being that the only reason they go to the tournament is because Tristan convinces them to.
My people have suffered enough. They see the wealth of Leonath on offer that seems more real than any alliance. My mind is set.
And ours as well.
So be it.
The other principal story point being, it has to be absolutely clear that without Tristan, Mark doesn't think there's any way to win that tournament or unite that kingdom. This is another one of those moments I was talking about before, where you're writing to a moment that you see right from the beginning of the conception of the idea, and this notion of Tristan essentially returning from the dead, and that, frankly, only making his legend grow, was one of them. And I love the way Kevin shot it. For some reason, it reminds me a little bit of Lawrence of Arabia. Sort of riding through with the hands reaching up and touching him. You know, I mean, it's as if it's Peter O'Toole and he's just crossed the desert and taken Aqaba. I mean, this is quite literally the return of hope. The reason for a party here was that it's really the last genuinely happy moment in the story. And it's the one moment where Tristan believes it's possible to have everything he wants.
Back from the dead.
There was a lot of discussion among the characters that's been edited out about what's so different about Tristan. Why does he seem lighter, happier? Why suddenly is he willing to embrace an idea of peace when before all he wanted to do was fight? And he doesn't tell anyone. But I think, again, the picture tells the story.
God knows what happened to him.
My face in thine eyes, thine and mine appears.
But really, this is
True plain hearts do
that moment in everybody's life where you think you can have everything. And for Tristan, he thinks peace is possible by winning a tournament and winning an Irish princess. And with peace, then his love for this Irish maid named Branya is also possible.
I fail to see how fighting with our partners keeps us allies.
And in pretty much every great tragic story, you have that moment
Remains loyal, while in turn offering support to members.
where it feels like fate has given you a chance, and all you have to do is take it.
If we win, if we lose, we could end up following Wictred. I'd need an infallible champion. You're not yet healed.
Well, this trip will be my tonic. I'll be ready. You know I will.
What's the source of this fervor?
Let me go and win you a wife. She can make peace without spilling one drop of blood. Maybe heal a wound from which you still ache.
A lot of thought went into what kind of tournament this would be. I mean, when I originally wrote it, I wrote it with jousting and horses, but historically that wasn't accurate at all. And Ridley pointed out that what people did back then was brawl, and so this would be a brawling tournament. when I first met James Franco, actually, when I first saw him, I actually saw a tape of him training to fight and training on horse and training to become Tristan. And at the time, we had no financing. We had Kevin Reynolds and we had Franco, and that was about it. And he was actually spending his own money and spent months so that he could physically do all of these things. I mean, the film, quite honestly, would not have happened without James's involvement. I mean, when he signed on to play Tristan, that's really what got the ball rolling.
Where's this princess? What's her name? Isolde? Oh, I see what she looks like.
And from a writer's perspective, he was a dream because he was fiercely protective of the script, which is every writer wants their leading man to fight for every line.
If I'm a present, I should be fully wrapped.
That's another image that was from the very first draft. This notion of having her wrapped like a present, because it's crucial that Tristan does not know it's Isolde that he's fighting for. If he does, then you lose the entire impact of what he's done.
See how the bees come to the honey.
Name? Tristan of Aragon.
So he lives.
For the moment. Name?
Fixing the odds against Tristan. It's actually a part of the story that kind of doesn't go anywhere. I mean, the idea was that Wictred would win and then ally himself with the Irish without sort of doing anything that strong against them, but
Will never unite behind him.
it doesn't really go anywhere.
You think she's got the pox?
Another example of several lines of dialogue turning into just a glance. I had a lot of discussion between Tristan and Malott about looking for this maid of his, all of which goes away because all you need to see is her looking down at him and then a moment of him looking around for her. I was always a sucker for the idea that she is sitting there thinking to herself, I'm watching someone risk his life to win me for himself. And this is one of those cases where, as a storyteller, I wanted the audience ahead of the story. I wanted the audience to know more than the characters know. So we're actually waiting through this entire fight for him to win and find out that it's her. I think we all know as viewers that he's going to win. And so every minute that this lasts is sort of another minute of build-up. I remember talking to Ridley Scott about a scene in Gladiator where the emperor tells his son he's not going to be the next emperor. And he does it right at the start of the scene because the audience is waiting for the murder that they know is going to happen. And it was the same idea here.
Allow it.
That allow it is actually a little secret nod to John Borman's Excalibur. There's a moment in a joust between Lancelot and a man who's accusing Lancelot Guinevere of being in love, where something similar happens. And if I remember correctly, they actually say allow. And I wanted to put some little moment in as an acknowledgement to that movie without stealing from it, because it was definitely a movie that, it's the movie that inspired me to read Tristan and Isolde and to learn about Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot. And so it seemed only right that find a little secret writer's way to acknowledge it. in all the versions of the tournament, what you do as a writer is you design, in general, the rhythm of the sequence. In this case, designing it so that Tristan is fighting harder and harder opponents and getting more and more tired, so that by the time he actually wins, he's pretty much emotionally and physically exhausted. So he's at his low, and then Isolde being revealed to him is sort of the figurative blow. And while most of the time the actual choreography of the fight changes with the reality of your actors and what they can and can't do, the rhythm doesn't. Most of the time you'll find the first fight will be challenging, then you'll do a couple quick cuts of fights, and then the last fight will be your sort of resume normal time. Kevin Reynolds did something here that I'm really glad he did. When I had written the original screenplay, the fight between Wictred and Tristan was actually pretty short. And I think by making Wictred a better opponent than I had originally had him, just builds up in the audience's mind the idea that this guy is actually someone to be reckoned with later in your story. And I think it's no exaggeration to say James Franco trained for months on his own to be able to do the fighting and the horse work in this movie. And that's one of those things that, you know, no special effect can fake that. And you can see it's him. And sometimes people underestimate what an effect that has on an audience. Guys are good. Again, it's speed. That Tristan wins with speed. The notion that the crowd would start cheering for Tristan is actually one that never occurred to me. I didn't even think about it until I saw it in the film. I'm not sure I like it, actually, just because I don't know why they would cheer for Tristan over Wictred, but throwing the peanuts at him, that's classic.
An impressive victory.
If there was a single moment that described why I wanted to write this movie, when I decided to write it, it's the unveiling of Isolde. When I decided to write the movie, I think at the time I felt torn between several things in my life, and I felt like I couldn't have everything I wanted. And the moment that Tristan realizes not only can he not have what he wants, but that actually the worst thing that could ever happen to him has just happened, and he's the cause of it. He's never going to have the woman he loves. And any chance he ever could have had is now gone. Because he's built a political alliance that hinges on her. So in essence, everything he's worked for hinges on her. And he knows he can't have her.
Let him take her across the sea. After the wedding, I'll disavow Isolde. This alliance will crumble.
The principal change to their relationship from first draft to finished film was the removal of any real anger between the two of them. And that's most true here on the boat and then in the few sequences that follow. Originally, they got into an argument in this scene because Tristan is essentially trying to pretend that she doesn't matter to him. And she thinks, I must not matter to him. He's just won me for someone else.
You risked your life to give me to another man.
And as a writer, I made the choice for them to be angry at each other because it seemed very natural to me. In fact, in general, when you love someone and it's starting to not work out, the first phase always seems to be anger. And in this case, anger has been taken out of the relationship. It's probably the one change as a writer, the only change that I wish hadn't occurred. I do miss the anger.
We must.
Don't do this to me.
You know, his line that you told me your name was Branya was an accusation as originally written, not sort of a plaintive explanation.
What if she's a hag? She simply won't have me.
One of the things I'm most happy about as a writer is that Mark's relationship with Isolde was preserved from the very first draft. And what I mean by that was we made every effort to make their relationship itself be one that you really couldn't object much to. And a lot of times as a writer, you're pressured to make the messy part of the story a little cleaner. You know, let's make Mark more of a jerk. That way the affair is a little more excusable. But Kevin Reynolds and Ridley Scott both agreed immediately